The wedding reception was in full swing when my wife decided to destroy our marriage in front of half the town. I'd been watching Beth from across the dance floor at the Riverside Inn, nursing my third beer and thinking she looked beautiful in that blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. The same anniversary she'd forgotten last month. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I walked over as the band started playing At Last, our song, or what used to be our song. I extended my hand with a smile that felt genuine for the first time in weeks. Care to dance, Mrs. Parish? Beth looked at me like I just asked her to eat dirt. Her perfectly manicured hand came up fast and hard, shoving me backward into the dessert table. Wedding cake splattered across my work shirt as conversations died around us. Stop acting like we're a couple, James. You're embarrassing me. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. 200 pairs of eyes stared at us. I could see Beth's friend Chloe smirking behind her champagne glass, probably already composing the Facebook post that would make this the talk of Millfield by morning. I straightened up, brushed frosting off my sleeve, and pulled my wedding ring off my finger. The gold band hit the wooden dance floor with a tiny ping that somehow carried across the entire ballroom. You're right, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We're not a couple anymore. I walked out of that reception hall with my head high and my heart somewhere around my boots. 23 people called my name. I didn't turn around once. The drive home to our farmhouse on Maple Ridge Road took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to replay 5 years of marriage and wonder where the hell it all went wrong. Beth Parish, née Whitman, had been the prettiest girl in our high school class. I'd been the guy who fixed her car in the parking lot and somehow convinced her to go to prom with me. Back then, she'd laughed at my jokes and didn't care that I had grease under my fingernails. She'd even helped me start Parish Electric after we got married, stuffing envelopes and answering phones while I crawled through attics and basements, building our business one outlet at a time. Now, she worked at Millfield Realty, showing million-dollar lake houses to rich folks from Boston, and I was just the blue-collar husband who cramped her style. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the house we'd bought together 3 years ago. White colonial with black shutters, 2-car garage, and a workshop out back where I stored my electrical supplies. The American dream, complete with a mortgage that would outlive us both. Inside, the house felt different. Maybe it was just knowing Beth wouldn't be home until late, if at all, but something had shifted. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and noticed her phone charger plugged into the kitchen outlet. Beth never went anywhere without her phone. That's when I heard it. A soft buzzing from upstairs. I found her iPhone on the nightstand, screen lighting up with text notifications. The preview showed enough to make my stomach drop. Can't wait to see you tonight. JP. She's getting suspicious. We need to be more careful. Meet me at the usual place in an hour. JP. I knew exactly one person with those initials who'd be texting my wife at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. John Parish, my older brother. I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed, I corrected myself, and stared at that phone like it might explode. Part of me wanted to throw it against the wall and pretend I'd never seen those messages. The other part, the part that had been wondering why Beth worked so many late nights lately, needed to know the truth. Her laptop was downstairs in the home office, password protected but not well. Beth had always been terrible with technology. Her password was our anniversary date, the one she'd forgotten last month but apparently still used to secure her digital life. I opened her email and immediately wished I hadn't. The folder labeled Personal contained 2 months of correspondence that read like a bad romance novel. My brother and my wife, planning meetings, sharing inside jokes, and discussing their future together. A future that apparently didn't include me. The timestamps were what really twisted the knife. Every business trip I'd taken to Boston, every weekend I'd worked overtime to pay for Beth's shopping sprees, every night I'd fallen asleep alone while she claimed to be working late. They'd been together. I was still reading when I heard her car in the driveway. Beth walked through the front door looking guilty as hell, her lipstick smeared and her hair messed up in a way that told its own story. She stopped when she saw me sitting at her laptop. James? What are you doing? Reading, I said without looking up. Fascinating stuff. Did you know your password is our anniversary? The one you forgot last month? Her face went white, then red, then white again. You had no right to. To what? To find out my wife is screwing my brother? I closed the laptop and stood up. I think I had every right in the world. It's not what you think. I laughed, and the sound that came out was nothing like humor. Really? Because what I think is that you've been lying to me for months. What I think is that while I've been working 60-hour weeks to pay for this house and your car and your clothes, you've been playing house with John? James, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you're in love with him? That you've been planning to leave me? That every time you said you were working late, you were actually... Stop! Her voice cracked. Just stop. But I couldn't stop. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of building a life together, and she'd thrown it all away for my charming, successful, golden boy brother, who'd never worked a day of honest labor in his life. Does he know you snore? I asked. Does he know you eat ice cream for breakfast when you think nobody's looking? Does he know about the scar on your shoulder from when you fell off your bike in 3rd grade? Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. The man who'd loved Beth Whitman since high school was gone, and in his place was someone harder, someone who'd been made a fool of but wouldn't stay one. I'm sorry, she whispered. No, I said, heading for the stairs. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. I packed a bag and drove to my sister Connie's house on the other side of town. She took one look at my face and put on a pot of coffee without asking questions. Connie had always been the smart one in our family, the one who saw through people's bullshit and wasn't afraid to call it out. How long have you known? I asked when I finished telling her everything. About John being a snake? Since we were kids. She poured coffee into 2 mugs and sat across from me at her kitchen table. About Beth and John, specifically? I suspected something at Mom's birthday party last month, the way they looked at each other when they thought nobody was watching. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have believed me? I thought about that. Probably not. I'd been so busy working, so focused on building our future, that I'd missed all the signs. Or maybe I'd just chosen not to see them. What are you going to do? Connie asked. I sipped my coffee and felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. I'm going to make sure they get exactly what they deserve. Monday morning came too soon and not soon enough. I'd spent Sunday at Connie's, making plans and trying to process the fact that my marriage was over. By the time I walked into Parish Electric at 7 a.m., I'd made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. I was going to destroy them both. Not physically. I wasn't a violent man, despite what people might think about guys who worked with their hands. But there were other ways to hurt people, especially people who cared more about their reputation than their integrity. Carl Martinez was already in the shop, going over the day's work orders with his usual military precision. He'd been my foreman for 3 years, ever since he got out of the Marines, and I trusted him more than anyone except Connie. If I was going to war, I'd need allies. Boss, he said, looking up from the clipboard, you look like hell. Feel worse. I poured coffee from the pot Carl always had ready by 6:30. Beth and I are getting divorced. Carl didn't seem surprised. He'd been married and divorced twice, so he probably recognized the signs better than I had. Sorry to hear that. What happened? She's been screwing my brother. Now Carl looked surprised. John? The pretty boy who runs the front office? That's the one. Carl set down his clipboard and gave me his full attention. In the Marines, he'd been an intelligence specialist, which was a fancy way of saying he knew how to gather information and use it strategically. What do you need? Over the next hour, I laid out everything I knew and everything I suspected. Carl listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped clarify the timeline. By the time our first crew arrived, we had the beginnings of a plan. First thing we need is documentation, Carl said. Anything that proves the affair and shows how long it's been going on. I've got our emails and text messages. That's a start, but we need more. Bank records, credit card statements, anything that shows a pattern. I had access to all our joint accounts, plus I knew Beth's spending habits better than she did. It wouldn't be hard to trace her movements over the past few months. What about John? I asked. Carl smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. Leave your brother to me. The rest of the week fell into a routine that felt almost normal. I worked my regular jobs, supervised my crews, and came home to an empty house every night. Beth had moved in with Chloe temporarily, according to the note she'd left on the kitchen counter. She'd also taken half the money from our savings account and maxed out 2 credit cards. That was her first mistake. I called the credit card companies and reported the cards stolen. Since they were in my name, with Beth as an authorized user, I had every right to cancel them. I also moved the rest of our savings to a new account at a different bank. Her second mistake was underestimating how much I knew about her habits. Beth had always been careful with money, almost obsessively so. She tracked every purchase in a little notebook and saved every receipt. When I went through her desk in the home office, I found 6 months' worth of documentation that painted a very clear picture. Lunch at Romano's every Tuesday for the past 2 months. Always for 2 people, always paid with cash. Gas receipts from the mobile station on Lake Road, which was nowhere near her office, but right on the way to John's condo. Hotel receipts from Portland, where she'd supposedly gone for real estate conferences that I now knew didn't exist. But the most damaging evidence was something she'd probably forgotten about entirely. Beth had started using a fitness tracking app on her phone 6 months ago, trying to get back in shape for our high school reunion. The app tracked her location throughout the day, creating a detailed map of everywhere she went. According to her phone, Beth had spent at least 3 hours at John's condo every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 8 weeks. She'd also made weekend trips to his place when I was out of town on business. I printed everything out and made copies, storing the originals in a safety deposit box at the bank. Then I started phase 2 of my plan. John had always been the golden boy of the Parish family. 2 years older than me, better looking, more charming, and blessed with the kind of natural charisma that made people want to follow him. He'd parlayed those gifts into a successful career in sales, eventually becoming the public face of Parish Electric while I handled the technical side. Our father had made him a partner in the business 5 years ago, against my objections. I'd built the company from nothing, but Dad believed John's people skills were essential for growth. He wasn't wrong. Our revenue had doubled since John came aboard. But I'd always resented having to share my life's work with someone who'd never gotten his hands dirty. Now I was going to use John's vanity against him. Carl had a friend who worked in private security, a guy named Tommy who specialized in surveillance equipment. For $500, Tommy sold us a digital recorder the size of a matchbook and showed us how to use it. The plan was simple. I'd provoke John into saying something incriminating, and Carl would record the whole conversation. It wasn't admissible in court, but it didn't need to be. I wasn't planning to sue anybody. I was planning something much more satisfying. Friday afternoon, I found John in his office, reviewing sales reports and looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and expensive haircut. He glanced up when I walked in, and I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "James, how are you holding up?" "Oh, I'm fantastic," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "My wife's been screwing my brother for months, but other than that, life's just peachy." John had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Look, I know this is awkward." "Awkward?" I laughed. "That's one way to put it. I was thinking more along the lines of screwed up, but awkward works too." "It's not what you think." "Jesus, John, you sound just like her. Is that what you two practiced? Your story for when I found out?" He leaned back in his chair, and I saw the exact moment when he decided to stop pretending to be sorry. The mask slipped, revealing the arrogant bastard underneath. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to your wife instead of burying yourself in work, this wouldn't have happened. "So it's my fault?" "I'm just saying Beth needed things you weren't giving her." "Like what?" "Money? Because I've been busting my ass to pay for everything she wanted." "Not everything's about money, James." "No?" "Then what's it about?" John stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where my work truck sat next to his BMW. "It's about ambition. It's about wanting more than just getting by." "Getting by?" I felt my temper starting to fray. "I built this company from nothing. I employ 23 people. I own a house and 2 vehicles and have money in the bank. That's not getting by. That's succeeding. By your standards, maybe." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" He turned back to face me, and I saw something ugly in his expression. "It means Beth deserves better than a life married to a glorified handyman." That's when I knew I had him. Better like you, better like me. "And what makes you so much better, John? Your fancy suits, your college degree, the fact that you've never done an honest day's work in your life." "I've done plenty of work. I've grown this company." "You've grown it by selling what I built. You're a middleman, John. You take what other people create and slap your name on it." His face was getting red now, which meant his mouth was about to run ahead of his brain. "At least I have vision. At least I can see beyond the next electrical outlet." "Vision? Is that what you call screwing your brother's wife?" "I call it recognizing an opportunity." "Bingo. An opportunity? Beth's smart, she's beautiful, and she's wasted on someone who can't appreciate what he has. She belongs with someone who can give her the life she wants." "The life she wants, or the life you want?" "Both." He was fully committed now, his ego driving the conversation. "We're planning a future together, James. A real future, not just scraping by in some small-town electrical business." "What kind of future?" "The kind where we don't have to worry about money. The kind where we can travel, live well, enjoy life instead of just surviving it." I stood up slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "Sounds expensive." "It will be. Good thing you'll have your share of the business to fund it." John smiled, and it was the most arrogant expression I'd ever seen. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Dad's been thinking about restructuring the partnership agreement. Has he now? He thinks it might be time for me to take a more active role in running the company. You know, handle the big picture while you focus on the technical stuff. I nodded like I was considering it. So you want to push me out of my own business so you can afford to keep my wife in the style she's become accustomed to. I wouldn't put it like that. How would you put it? I'd say it's time for both of us to get what we deserve. Perfect. I headed for the door, then turned back like I'd just thought of something. You know what, John? You're absolutely right. It is time for both of us to get what we deserve. I left him sitting there looking pleased with himself, probably already planning how he'd spend the money from my life's work. He had no idea that Carl had been listening to every word from the supply closet next door, recording everything on Tommy's little device. That night, I sat in my empty house and listened to the recording 3 times. John's voice came through crystal clear, admitting to the affair, outlining his plans to steal my business, and generally revealing himself to be exactly the kind of man I'd always suspected he was. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time for Phase 3. The Golden Tap had been Millfield's unofficial town hall for as long as anyone could remember. If you wanted to know what was happening in people's lives, you grabbed a stool at Lou Brennan's bar and waited. Eventually, every piece of gossip in town would flow through that room like water through a drain. I'd been avoiding the place since the wedding reception, partly because I wasn't ready to face the questions, and partly because I knew Beth and John had been meeting there. But on Saturday night, exactly 1 week after my world imploded, I decided it was time to start controlling the narrative. Lou was behind the bar when I walked in, polishing glasses and keeping one eye on the Red Sox game. He'd owned the Golden Tap for 15 years, ever since he retired from the fire department, and he knew everyone's business better than they knew it themselves. "James," he said, not looking up from the glass in his hands, "heard you and Beth are having some trouble." That's one way to put it. I took my usual stool at the end of the bar, away from the crowd around the television. "Whiskey? Make it a double." Lou poured Jameson into a rocks glass and set it in front of me. "Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." "Fair enough." He went back to polishing glasses, giving me space to drink in peace. That lasted about 10 minutes, until Chloe Henderson walked in with 2 of her real estate friends. Chloe had been Beth's best friend since high school, the kind of woman who collected other people's drama like some folks collected stamps. She was also the biggest gossip in town, which made her both dangerous and useful. She spotted me immediately and made a beeline for my end of the bar, her friends trailing behind like pilot fish following a shark. "James, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Chloe." "Thanks for asking." "Beth's staying with me, you know. She's just devastated about everything." I took a sip of whiskey and looked at her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. "I'm sure she is. She feels terrible about how things ended between you 2. "Does she?" "Of course she does. She never meant for it to happen this way." I turned on my stool to face her directly. "What way did she mean for it to happen?" Chloe's smile faltered. She'd expected me to be broken, maybe looking for sympathy or someone to blame. She wasn't prepared for the calm, almost amused tone in my voice. "I just mean she's sorry things got so complicated." "Complicated?" I nodded thoughtfully. "That's an interesting word for it. Marriage is hard, James. Sometimes people grow apart and... Chloe, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How long have you known about Beth and my brother?" The question hit her like a slap. Her face went white, then red, then settled into an expression of guilty panic. Her friends suddenly found their drinks very interesting. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. You've been covering for them, haven't you? Providing alibis, helping them meet up, maybe even letting them use your place when I was out of town." "James, I would never..." "Never what? Never help your best friend cheat on her husband? Never lie to someone you've known for 15 years? Never participate in something that would humiliate me in front of the entire town?" The bar had gone quiet around us. Lou was still polishing glasses, but I could tell he was listening to every word. So was everyone else. "It's not like that," Chloe said weakly. "Then what's it like?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again without making a sound. Finally, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door, her friends scrambling to follow. "Tell Beth I said hello," I called after her. Lou set down his glass and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "That was cold, James." "She had it coming." "Maybe so." He refilled my glass without being asked. "But you know this is going to be all over town by tomorrow morning." "I'm counting on it." And it was. Yeah, by Sunday afternoon, my phone was buzzing with calls from people who'd heard different versions of the story. Some were sympathetic, others were curious, and a few were just looking for more details to fuel the gossip mill. I answered the ones I wanted to answer and ignored the rest. Monday morning brought a new development. Beth called while I was having coffee at Connie's house, her voice tight with anger. "What did you say to Chloe?" "Good morning to you too, Beth." "She's upset, James. She's been crying all weekend." "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not. You did it on purpose." I carried the phone out to Connie's back porch where I could talk without being overheard. "Did what on purpose?" "You know what? You embarrassed her in front of everyone at the bar." I asked her a question. She didn't like the answer she had to give. "You had no right to drag her into this. She dragged herself into it the minute she started helping you cheat on me." Silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. "Beth? I want to come get my things." "When?" "This afternoon, while you're at work." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, if you want your things, you can come get them when I'm there. I'm not giving you free run of the house. I have a right to my belongings." "You have a right to whatever you can prove you bought with your own money. Everything else stays put until we work out the details." Another long silence. "Fine. I'll be there at 6. She hung up without saying goodbye. At 5:30, I was sitting in my kitchen when I heard cars in the driveway. Not one car, 3. I looked out the window and saw Beth's Honda, John's BMW, and a pickup truck I didn't recognize. They were bringing backup. I opened the front door as they reached the porch. Beth looked nervous, John looked defiant, and the third man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that screamed lawyer, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "James," Beth said, "this is David Morrison. He's representing me in the divorce." Morrison stepped forward with his hand extended. "Mr. Parish, I hope we can handle this amicably." I shook his hand but kept my eyes on John. "That depends on what you consider amicable." "Beth just wants to collect some personal items," Morrison said. "Clothes, jewelry, things that clearly belong to her." "Fine. But he doesn't come in my house." I pointed at John. "James," Beth started. "He doesn't come in my house," I repeated. "He can wait in the car." John's face darkened. "You can't keep me out of—" "Actually, I can. It's my house, my mortgage, my name on the deed. You want to come in? Get a warrant." Morrison put a restraining hand on John's arm. "It's fine, John. Wait in the car." For a moment, I thought John might try to push past me anyway. He was bigger than me, but I'd been doing physical work my entire adult life, and he'd been sitting behind a desk. If he wanted to make it physical, I was ready. Instead, he turned and stalked back to his BMW, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. "Shall we go inside?" Morrison asked. I led them through the house, watching as Beth collected clothes, jewelry, and personal items. She moved quickly, like she couldn't wait to get out of there, avoiding eye contact and speaking only when Morrison asked her questions. In the bedroom, she packed 2 suitcases with clothes and toiletries. In the bathroom, she took her makeup and hair products. In the home office, she reached for her laptop. "That stays," I said. "It's mine. It's evidence." Morrison looked up sharply. "Evidence of what?" "Ask your client." Beth's face went white. She knew exactly what was on that laptop, and she knew I'd seen it all. "Beth?" Morrison said. "It's fine," she said quickly. "I don't need it." They finished packing and headed for the door. I followed them out to the driveway, where John was pacing beside his car like a caged animal. "Get what you came for?" he asked Beth. "Most of it." "What about the rest?" "We'll deal with it later," Morrison said firmly. "Let's go." But John wasn't ready to leave. He walked over to where I was standing by the front door, stopping just close enough to be intimidating. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's not. You think you're so smart, recording our conversation, playing your little games, but you have no idea what you're up against," I smiled. "Why don't you enlighten me?" "I've got friends in this town, James. Important friends, people who can make your life very difficult." "Like who?" "Like the planning board that approves your building permits, like the bank that holds your business loan, like the customers who decide whether to hire Parish Electric or one of your competitors." "You're threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality. You want to play hardball? Fine. But remember, I've got a lot more to lose than you do, which means I'll fight a lot harder to protect it." He turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing in my driveway with a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Parish," Morrison said, "I hope you'll consider mediation. Divorce proceedings can get very ugly very quickly." "They already are ugly," I said. "The question is how much uglier they're going to get." After they left, I sat on my front porch and thought about John's threats. He wasn't wrong. He did have friends in town, people who could make my professional life complicated, but he'd made a mistake by threatening me so directly, and he'd made an even bigger mistake by underestimating how far I was willing to go. I pulled out my phone and called Carl. "It's time for Phase 4, I said when he answered. "What do you need?" "Everything you can find on John's business dealings. Bank records, client lists, expense accounts, everything. That might take some time." "We've got time. How long does it usually take for a reputation to completely fall apart?" Carl chuckled. "In a town this size?" "About a week, if you do it right." "Then let's do it right." Carl's military training proved more useful than I'd expected. Within 3 days, he'd compiled a dossier on John that read like a case study in white-collar sleaze. My brother had been busy while I was focused on the technical side of the business. We met at Dunkin' Donuts on Tuesday morning, 2 guys having coffee and going over what looked like construction blueprints. Nobody paid attention to us, which was exactly what we wanted. "Your brother's been skimming," Carl said, sliding a folder across the table. "Look at page 3. The expense reports made for interesting reading. John had been billing the company for client dinners that never happened, hotel stays for business trips he'd never taken, and equipment purchases that had somehow never made it to our inventory." "How much?" I asked. "Conservatively? 30,000 over the past year. Maybe more if we dig deeper." "Can you prove it?" "Most of it. He's been sloppy. Probably figured nobody would look too close as long as the sales numbers stayed strong." I flipped through the rest of the folder. Bank statements, credit card records, copies of invoices that didn't match our accounting records. Carl had been thorough. "There's more," he said. "Page 7. Page 7 was a copy of a contract I'd never seen before. John had apparently made a deal with Millfield Construction to be their exclusive electrical contractor, promising them a 20% discount on all work in exchange for guaranteed business. "When did he sign this?" 2 months ago. Without telling you, and definitely without authorization from your father. The contract was worth potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, but at such a reduced rate that we'd barely break even. John had essentially promised to do a year's worth of work for free, just to pad his sales numbers. "He's been telling Dad that business is booming," I said. "Business is booming. Profitable business? Not so much." I closed the folder and looked across the table at Carl. "What else?" "Personal stuff. Your brother likes to live well." Carl had done his homework. John's credit card statements showed regular charges at expensive restaurants, high-end clothing stores, and luxury hotels. His bank records showed cash withdrawals that didn't match his salary, and deposits that couldn't be explained by his legitimate income. "Where's the extra money coming from?" "That's the interesting part. Look at the timing of the deposits." I studied the bank statements and saw the pattern immediately. Large cash deposits, always within a few days of major payments from our commercial clients. John wasn't just skimming from expense accounts. He was skimming from customer payments. Bastard. Gets better. He's been using company credit to finance his lifestyle, then covering the shortfalls with money that should have gone into the business account. "How much?" "Hard to say, without access to all the records, but I'd estimate at least 50,000, maybe more." I sat back in my chair and processed what Carl had found. John wasn't just cheating with my wife. He was stealing from the family business. He was jeopardizing 23 jobs and the reputation I'd spent 5 years building. "What do you want to do with this?" Carl asked. "I want to destroy him." "Legally?" "Preferably, but I'm open to other options." Carl grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." The plan we developed was simple but effective. Instead of confronting John directly or turning the evidence over to the police, we decided to let him hang himself with his own rope. Carl had a contact at the bank, a woman named Sandra, who processed business loans and had access to account records. For the price of dinner and a promise to fix her kitchen wiring for free, she agreed to flag any unusual activity on Parish Electric's accounts. "If he's been moving money around, there'll be a paper trail," Sandra explained when we met at her house that evening. "Banks are required to report certain types of transactions, and if someone's been playing games with business funds, it shows up in the audit reports." "How long before you know something?" "Give me a week. Maybe less if he's been as sloppy as you think." While Sandra worked her magic with the financial records, Carl and I focused on the Millfield construction contract. The deal John had made was not only unauthorized, it was potentially illegal. As a partner in Parish Electric, he had a fiduciary duty to act in the company's best interests, not make sweetheart deals that benefited his sales numbers at the expense of profitability. I called our family lawyer, a guy named Pete Kowalski, who'd handled the original partnership agreement between me and John. "Can he make contracts without my approval?" I asked. "Depends on the terms of your partnership agreement. Let me pull your file." Pete called back an hour later with news that made my day. According to the agreement your father drafted, any contract worth more than $25,000 requires approval from both partners. If John signs something worth more than that without your consent, he's in breach of the partnership agreement. What does that mean? It means you can dissolve the partnership and force him out of the business. How long would that take? If you can prove he acted without authorization? Maybe 60 days. Less if he doesn't fight it. I thanked Pete and hung up, feeling better than I had in weeks. John thought he held all the cards, but he'd been playing with a rigged deck. Wednesday afternoon, I was at a job site rewiring a restaurant kitchen when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Beth's number. "What do you want?" "We need to talk." I thought that's what lawyers were for. Not about the divorce. About John. That got my attention. "What about him? Can you meet me somewhere? Somewhere private?" "Why?" "Because I think I made a mistake." An hour later, I was sitting across from my wife in a booth at Friendly's, watching her pick at a salad she'd barely touched. She looked tired, older somehow, like the past 2 weeks had aged her more than the previous 2 years. "John's not who I thought he was," she said without preamble. "Really?" "What gave it away?" "Don't be sarcastic, James. I'm trying to tell you something important." I waited. "He's been pressuring me to sign papers. Documents that would give him access to my share of the house, my retirement account, things like that. And when I asked why, he said it was for our future together. But when I pressed him for details, he got angry. Really angry." I sipped my coffee and tried to look sympathetic instead of satisfied. "What kind of angry?" He grabbed my arm. Hard enough to leave bruises. She pushed up her sleeve and showed me finger-shaped marks on her wrist. He said I needed to trust him, that he was trying to protect both of us from you. "Protect you from me?" He said you were planning to take everything in the divorce? The house, my car, my savings. He said the only way to stop you was to move our assets somewhere you couldn't touch them. I leaned back in the booth and studied my wife's face. She was scared, genuinely scared, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. "Beth, John doesn't give a damn about protecting you. He's trying to protect himself." "From what? From going to prison for embezzlement?" Her face went white. "What are you talking about?" I told her everything Carl had discovered. The skimmed expenses, the unauthorized contract, the money that had been diverted from business accounts to fund John's lifestyle. By the time I finished, she was crying. "Oh God, James, what have I done? You fell for a con man. It happens." "No, it's more than that. I've been helping him." "Helping him how?" "He asked me to cash checks for him. Small amounts, a few $100s at a time. He said it was easier than going to the bank." "Checks from who?" "Parish Electric customers." He said they were partial payments, that you knew about them. I felt my stomach drop. "How many checks?" "I don't know. Maybe 20 or 30 over the past few months." "Beth, those weren't partial payments. Those were customer deposits. Money that was supposed to go directly into the business account." She put her face in her hands and sobbed. "I'm going to jail, aren't I?" "Not if you help me stop him." She looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "How?" "By giving me copies of every check you cashed, every document you signed, every conversation you can remember about money." "Will that be enough?" "It'll be a start." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything Beth could remember about her financial dealings with John. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd been systematically looting Parish Electric while using my wife as an unwitting accomplice. "Why didn't you tell me about the checks?" I asked. "Because I thought you already knew. And because—" she trailed off. "Because what?" "Because I wanted to believe John when he said you didn't appreciate me. It felt good to have someone who seemed to value what I brought to the relationship." "What you brought to the relationship was yourself, Beth." "That should have been enough. But it wasn't, was it? You were always working, always focused on the business. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling?" She wasn't wrong, and that hurt more than I wanted to admit. I'd been so focused on building our financial future that I'd neglected our emotional present. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have been a better husband. And I should have been a better wife. But that doesn't change what's happening now." "No, it doesn't." She wiped her eyes with a napkin and looked at me directly for the first time in months. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to help me catch him." "How?" "By wearing a wire." The plan was Carl's idea, but it made perfect sense. If we could get John to admit on tape that he'd been stealing from the company and using Beth to launder money, we'd have everything we needed to destroy him legally and professionally. "It's risky," Carl warned when the three of us met at his apartment that evening. If John suspects something, this could go bad quickly. How bad? Beth asked. Bad enough that you might want to consider leaving town for a while after we do this. Beth looked at me, then back at Carl. Will it stop him? If it works, yeah, it'll stop him permanently. Then let's do it. Tommy, Carl's security friend, provided the equipment, a digital recorder smaller than a pack of gum that could be taped to Beth's body and would pick up conversations from 20 feet away. The key is to get him talking about specifics, Tommy explained. Dollar amounts, dates, names of customers, the more detail, the better. What if he gets suspicious? Then you get out of there immediately. Don't try to be a hero. We scheduled the meeting for Friday evening at John's condo. Beth would tell him she was ready to sign whatever papers he wanted, but she needed to understand exactly what they were doing with the money. Remember, I told her as we tested the equipment one final time, you're not trying to trap him. You're just asking questions any reasonable person would ask. What if he tries to, tries to what? What if he wants to have intimacy? I hadn't thought about that possibility, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. The idea of John touching my wife, even my soon-to-be ex-wife, made me want to break something. Then you tell him you're not feeling well, Carl said. Food poisoning, headache, whatever. Just keep him talking. Friday evening came too quickly and not quickly enough. Carl and I sat in his truck outside John's condo complex, monitoring the audio feed from Beth's wire and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. At 7:15, Beth knocked on John's door. Right on time, we heard him say through the receiver. Come in. For the next hour, we listened to the most damning confession I'd ever heard. John laid out everything. How he'd been skimming from expense accounts, diverting customer payments, and using Beth to cash checks that should have gone into the business account. The beauty of it is that James has no idea, John said at one point. He's so focused on the technical side that he never looks at the big picture. By the time he figures out what's happening, we'll be long gone. Gone where? Florida, maybe, or California. Somewhere warm, where we can start over. With what money? The money we've been saving, plus your share of the house, plus what I can get for my partnership stake in the business. How much is that worth? Conservative estimate? About $200,000, maybe more if I can negotiate a good buyout. And James will just let you walk away? John laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. James doesn't have a choice. I've got dirt on him, too. What kind of dirt? Let's just say he's not as clean as he pretends to be. That was news to me. I looked at Carl, who shrugged. We both knew John was lying, but Beth didn't. What are you talking about? She asked. Your husband's been cutting corners on jobs, using substandard materials, bribing inspectors. If that information got out, Parish Electric would be finished. Is that true? True enough. And even if it wasn't, who do you think people would believe? The charming salesman who brings in all the business, or the antisocial electrician who barely talks to customers? I'd heard enough. I pulled out my phone and called Beth's number, letting it ring once before hanging up, the signal we'd agreed on to let her know it was time to leave. I should go, we heard her say. It's getting late. Stay, John said. We can celebrate. Celebrate what? Our future together. There was a long pause, then the sound of movement. John, don't... Come on, Beth. We're going to be together anyway. Why wait? Because I'm not ready. You seemed ready last week. That was different. How was it different? Another pause, longer this time. Because last week I didn't know you were a thief. The silence that followed was so complete I thought the wire had malfunctioned. Then John's voice came through, low and dangerous. What did you just say? I said I know what you've been doing. Stealing from the company, using me to cash checks, lying about everything. Who told you that? Nobody had to tell me. I figured it out myself. Bullshit. James got to you, didn't he? He's been filling your head with lies. Are they lies, John? Because the numbers don't add up. The checks you had me cash, the money you've been spending, where did it all come from? That's none of your business. It is if you want me to sign those papers. The sound of a slap came through the receiver so clearly that Carl and I both flinched. Then Beth's voice, shaky but defiant. I'm leaving. No, you're not. Yes, I am. Beth, sit down. We need to talk about this. We're done talking. The sound of a struggle, then Beth's voice, higher now, scared. Let go of me. Not until you listen to reason. John, you're hurting me. That was enough. Carl started the truck and we raced toward the condo, but we were still 2 minutes away when we heard the sound that made my blood freeze. Beth screaming. We took the stairs to John's third-floor condo 3 at a time, Carl's military training showing as he moved with lethal efficiency. The front door was locked, but Carl's shoulder made quick work of it. We found Beth in the living room, holding a broken lamp like a weapon, while John nursed a bleeding nose on the other side of the coffee table. "Get away from me," she was saying. "I'm not signing anything." "Beth!" I called out. She turned toward my voice, relief flooding her face. "James, thank God!" John looked from me to Carl to the splintered door frame, his expression shifting from anger to fear to calculation in the space of a heartbeat. "This is breaking and entering," he said, backing toward the kitchen. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Carl said, pulling out his phone. "I'll save you the trouble." "Wait." John held up his hands. "Let's all just calm down and talk about this like adults." "Adults?" I stepped into the room, glass crunching under my boots. "Adults don't steal from their family. Adults don't use their brother's wife to launder money." "I don't know what Beth told you, but she didn't tell me anything. I figured it out myself." I pulled a folded paper from my jacket pocket, a copy of the bank records Carl had obtained. 30,000 in unauthorized expenses, 20,000 in diverted customer payments, an illegal contract that would have bankrupted the company. John's face went pale. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can. Sandra Morrison at First National was very helpful. Amazing what shows up when someone actually looks at the account records." "Sandra Morrison?" John's voice cracked slightly. "She's not authorized to share confidential bank information." "She is when there's suspected fraud involved." "Which there is." Carl stepped forward, his phone still in his hand. "Should I call the police now, or do you want to hear the rest?" "There's more?" I nodded toward Beth, who was still holding the broken lamp. "Tell him about the wire." John's eyes went wide. "What wire?" Beth reached under her shirt and pulled out the tiny recorder, holding it up like evidence in a courtroom. "This wire. The one that's been recording everything you said for the past hour." "You recorded me?" John's voice rose to almost a squeak. "That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," Carl said. "Maine's a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows about the recording, it's perfectly legal." John looked around the room like a trapped animal, his eyes darting from the broken door to the window to the phone on the kitchen counter. "This is insane," he said. "You're all insane." "Maybe," I said, "but we're not thieves." "I never stole anything." "No? Then explain the customer deposits that went into your personal account instead of the business account." "Those were commissions." "Commissions on what?" "We don't pay sales commissions." John opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing he just admitted to exactly what I'd accused him of. "The Millfield construction contract," I continued. "Who authorized you to offer them a 20% discount?" "That was a strategic decision that you made without consulting your partner, which, according to our partnership agreement, constitutes breach of fiduciary duty." "You can't dissolve the partnership over one contract?" "I can, when that contract was designed to hide the fact that you've been stealing from the company for months." Carl stepped closer to John, his military bearing making him seem larger and more dangerous than he actually was. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down, shut up, and listen while James explains your options." "I don't have to listen to anything." "Yes, you do, because the alternative is that I call the police right now and let them sort it out." John looked at Carl's face and apparently decided that sitting down was the better option. "Good choice," I said. "Now here's how this is going to work. Tomorrow morning, you're going to go to Dad and tell him you want out of the partnership. You're going to sign whatever papers Pete Kowalski puts in front of you, and you're going to walk away from Parish Electric forever. And if you don't, I turn the recording and the bank records over to the district attorney and let them decide whether to prosecute you for embezzlement, fraud, and whatever other charges they can make stick." "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. "This is D.A. Patricia Chen's direct number. Want me to call her?" John stared at the phone for a long moment, then slumped back in his chair. "What about the money?" "What about it?" The money that went into my personal account. Do I have to pay it back?" "Every penny, plus interest." "I don't have it." "Then you better figure out how to get it." "And if I can't?" Carl smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then you go to jail." John looked around the room one more time, his gaze lingering on Beth. "What about us?" "There is no us," Beth said firmly. "There never really was." "But you said—" "I said a lot of things. Most of them were lies, just like everything you told me." "Beth, please, we can work this out." "No, we can't. You're a liar and a thief, and I want nothing more to do with you." John's shoulders sagged as the reality of his situation finally sank in. So what happens now? Now you disappear, I said. You leave town, you don't come back, and you never contact any of us again. And if I do? Then we have a different kind of conversation. Carl cracked his knuckles, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. How long do I have? 72 hours to sign the papers and arrange repayment. After that, all bets are off. John nodded slowly, the fight finally going out of him. And you won't press charges? As long as you stick to the agreement. What about the recording? What about it? Will you destroy it? I looked at Carl, then at Beth. That depends. On what? On whether you give us any reason to use it. John stood up slowly, moving like an old man despite being only 40 years old. I need time to think about this. You've got until Monday morning. That's not enough time to? It's plenty of time. Monday morning, 9 a.m., at Pete Kowalski's office. Be there. John walked us to the broken door, his movements mechanical and defeated. James? What? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. He didn't argue. Outside in the parking lot, Beth finally broke down. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation wore off all at once, leaving her shaking and sobbing against my truck. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry for everything. I put my arms around her, and for a moment it felt like we were married again, like we were a team facing the world together instead of two people whose relationship had been destroyed by lies and betrayal. It's okay, I said. It's over now. No, it's not okay. I ruined everything. Our marriage, your relationship with your brother, everything. Beth, look at me. I tilted her chin up so she had to meet my eyes. John ruined everything. You just got caught in the middle. I should have seen through him. Maybe. But you didn't, and that's not entirely your fault. He's very good at telling people what they want to hear. Carl cleared his throat. We should get out of here. John might change his mind and call the cops anyway. We drove to an all-night diner on the outskirts of town, where we sat in a corner booth and tried to process what had just happened. Beth ordered coffee she didn't drink. Carl worked his way through a piece of apple pie, and I stared out the window at the empty parking lot. What happens now? Beth asked. Now we wait and see if John keeps his word. And if he doesn't, then we follow through on our threats. Will he go to jail? Probably. Embezzlement's a felony, especially when it's this much money. Beth nodded, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. James? Yeah? What happens to us? I'd been dreading that question all evening. I don't know. Do you think we could try again? Maybe go to counseling, work through our problems? I wanted to say yes. Part of me still loved her, still remembered the woman I'd married 5 years ago. But too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. I don't think so, Beth. Because of John? Because of everything. John, the lies, the way we've been treating each other for months. We can't go back to the way things were. Tears started rolling down her cheeks again. So this is really it? We're really getting divorced? Yeah, we're really getting divorced. But we can be friends? Maybe. Eventually. But not right now. She nodded and wiped her eyes with a napkin. Will you help me find a place to stay? I can't go back to Chloe's, not after everything that's happened. There's a furnished apartment above Lou's bar. He rents it out sometimes. Would you ask him? Sure. Carl drove Beth to the Golden Tap while I followed in my truck. Lou was just closing up, but he agreed to let Beth rent the apartment on a month-to-month basis. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, bathroom with a shower that barely worked, but it was clean and private and affordable. Thank you, Beth said as I helped her carry her suitcases upstairs. You're welcome. James? Yeah? I really am sorry about everything. I know. Do you forgive me? I thought about that question for a long moment. Did I forgive her? Could I forgive her? Now, ask me again in a year. Monday morning came gray and drizzly, the kind of Maine weather that made you want to stay in bed and pretend the world didn't exist. I was at Pete Kowalski's office by 8:30, reviewing the partnership dissolution papers and trying not to think about what this meant for the future of Parish Electric. At 9 o'clock sharp, John walked through the door. He looked terrible, unshaven, red-eyed, wearing the same clothes he'd had on Friday night. But he was there, and he had a cashier's check for $53,000. Every penny he'd stolen, plus interest. Where did you get the money? Pete asked. I liquidated my retirement account and sold my car. John signed every paper Pete put in front of him without reading them, his movements mechanical and defeated. When it was over, he was no longer a partner in Parish Electric, no longer entitled to any share of the profits, and legally prohibited from starting a competing business within 50 miles of Millfield. "That's it," Pete said, gathering up the signed documents. "You're officially dissolved." John stood up slowly, looking older than his 40 years. "James? What? Take care of the business. It's a good company. Don't let my mistakes destroy what you built." "I won't." He walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. "And James? Take care of Beth, too. She's going to need a friend." Then he was gone, and I was alone with Pete and a stack of papers that made me the sole owner of Parish Electric. "How do you feel?" Pete asked, like I just watched my brother die. "He made his choices." "Yeah, he did." I drove to the office, where Carl was waiting with coffee and the morning work orders. 23 employees were counting on me to keep the company running, to make sure their paychecks cleared and their families stayed fed. "Everything go okay?" Carl asked. "It's done." "And John?" "Gone. For good, I hope." Carl nodded. "What about the recording?" I pulled the tiny device out of my pocket and set it on my desk. "What recording?" Carl smiled and picked up the recorder, dropping it into his coffee cup. The device sizzled briefly, then went silent. "Oops," he said. "Clumsy me." That afternoon, I drove to the Golden Tap to check on Beth. She was sitting at a corner table, nursing a Diet Coke and staring out the window at the rain. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit." "For a minute." "I heard John left town. This morning, right after he signed the papers." "Where did he go?" "I don't know, and I don't want to know." Beth nodded. "Morrison called. He wants to move forward with the divorce." "Okay." "I'm not going to ask for anything, James. The house, the cars, the business, it's all yours." "Beth, no, let me finish. I know I don't deserve anything after what I did. I just want this to be over." "What will you do?" "Start over, I guess. Maybe move to Portland, get a job with a bigger real estate company." "You don't have to leave town." "Yes, I do. Everyone knows what happened. I can't stay here." She was probably right. Small towns had long memories, especially for scandals involving adultery and embezzlement. "Will you be okay?" "Eventually." She looked at me directly for the first time since I'd sat down. "Will you?" "Eventually. I hope you find someone who deserves you." "Beth, I mean it. You're a good man, James, a better man than I deserved." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're not a bad person, Beth. You just made some bad choices." "We both did." "Yeah, we both did." I left her sitting there and drove home to my empty house, where I sat on the front porch and watched the rain fall on the garden Beth had planted last spring. The flowers were starting to bloom, daffodils and tulips, and something purple I couldn't identify. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out how to run Parish Electric without John's sales expertise. I'd have to rebuild relationships with customers who might have heard rumors about the company's problems. I'd have to hire new people and train them and somehow keep everything together. But tonight, I just sat on my porch and watched the rain, thinking about marriage and betrayal and the price of revenge. I'd gotten everything I wanted. John was gone, Beth was out of my life, and I had complete control of the business I'd built from nothing. So why did I feel so empty? My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Thank you for everything. Take care of yourself." "B," I typed back. "You too." Then I deleted her number from my contacts and went inside to start figuring out what came next. 6 months later, Parish Electric was stronger than ever. Without John's unauthorized discounts and questionable contracts, our profit margins had improved dramatically. I'd hired 2 new electricians and a part-time bookkeeper, and we had more work than we could handle. Beth had moved to Portland, just like she'd said she would. According to Connie, she was working for a high-end real estate agency and doing well for herself. She'd sent divorce papers through her lawyer, asking for nothing except her personal belongings and her car. I signed them without argument. John had disappeared completely. No forwarding address, no contact with family, no trace of where he'd gone or what he was doing. It was like he'd never existed. Sometimes I wondered if I'd been too hard on him. If there might have been another way to handle the situation that didn't involve destroying my brother's life completely. But then I'd remember the recording, the casual way he'd talked about stealing from the family business and using my wife to help him do it. I'd remember the bruises on Beth's wrist and the sound of her screaming when he wouldn't let her leave his apartment. And I'd remember that some people got exactly what they deserved.